morning. So I'm about to release my free Christmas pattern, which is this fabulous bauble, and it comes in this lantern shape or in a standard round bauble. And as part of that, I know there's been some questions coming up in the tester group around sewing curves and any tips and tricks. So let's go through some. To start with, we're going to reduce our stitch length. So normally I sit around that 2.5 mark, somewhere closer to 2. For this, I'm going back to 1.5. Okay, so the next point we're going to make is where we're aligning our seam allowance. So I'm doing 1/4 inch, which is on this 7 line here on my machine, is where I'm lining that up. Now you can see that obviously down here, it's not aligned at all. That's nowhere near that 7. However, that's okay, because up here where the needle is, opposite that needle, is the only point that matters, because that's where that stitch is going to be going. So as I go around, I'm going to be keeping it so that that is where I'm lining up. So down here it's no biggie. Just keep going around slowly and carefully. Now the other thing that's really good is if you can keep your needle on a downward setting. So a lot of machines have an option for where your needle will end up as you pause sewing. If you can adjust it so that your needle is down, that is going to be very helpful, because that means we can lift our foot and pivot our work to keep that curve going more smoothly without having it go haywire, because the needle will be holding it where it is. Now I think one of the most important things is just to go slowly. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of zooming through things and getting things done quickly. However, if curves are something that you haven't done a lot of, just go slowly. Particularly with these baubles, how neatly you can sew your curves is going to have a huge impact on the final product that you make. So the slower you can go, just poke around, there's no rush, pivoting where you need to. The smoother the curve, the better, and just making sure that that seam allowance is lined up back near your needle, not worrying about what's happening out in front of your foot. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we clip our curves. So as you can see, we've gone around here and we've gotten our lovely nice seam allowance around there. Now if we were just to turn this through, we're going to end up with bulk and nothing's going to sit right, because it won't sit flat, because that curve isn't matching where that inner curve is. So the way to fix that, some people like to use pinking shears. They do work to an extent. Personally, I find that they don't give as neat of a result as snipping in. So what we're going to do is around these areas that have the more curve in, not along the flat, we don't need it there, but along where our curves are, we're going to do little release cuts that just go all the way right up until that seam, but not through it, because obviously we don't want to cut our seam. Just like that. And if you work around doing those, you will get a lovely flexible seam that when you turn it through will sit nice and flat, because as it turns, so if you can imagine, these all need to fold over on the inside, and they're going to find it a lot easier to do that where they can cross over each other because of those release cuts, versus around here, if you're trying to shove all that in, I don't even know how to make this work, you're going to end up with these bits, these wrinkly, yucky, not city flatty bits. However, some good release cuts, and it's a nice flexible seam allowance that will curve and overlap as needed to sit nice and flat. If you think about it like baking paper in a cake tin, obviously if you put a square piece of baking paper into your tin, it's going to get all wrinkly around the edges and it's not going to sit nicely. However, if you put some release cuts down into your baking paper towards the bottom, they'll overlap nicely and go around to make a nice clean cake edge. So same thing here. So just go around and do lots of snips into all of your curves. Now it's important to note I'm doing this on the bauble shape. However, if you are doing it on the lantern shape, your corners will need snipping as well. So if you have, I will find an example. Let's just use, so this piece of paper here. So this is a template I haven't cut out yet. So if you've got this as an edge, I'll find a pen, and we've just done our sewing that comes up around here and along there. Can we see that? We're going to chop along that line there. So to snip off those edges, not cutting into our seam, but getting as close as we possibly can, so that when we turn it through, it will all fold in nicely and we won't have big, bulky, yucky corners that don't sit square. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense, and good luck making your baubles. I hope you enjoy them.